Um, sorry, Steve. And I'm going to call the special meeting to order of the San Mateo County Harbor District Board of Commissioners. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Brennan,
Here.
Commissioner Chancarelli,
Present.
Commissioner Matoush,
Here.
Commissioner Bernardo,
Here.
Commissioner Lorenz is absent.
Okay, and we have a quorum, so we'll proceed with item B, which is the discussion item, and it's the consideration of and possible action on draft maps of voting district boundaries for a district-based election system, possible action on election sequence. So, Steve, I'm going to have you start off with the staff report.
Thank you, President Chancarelli, and I'll be very brief. This is in fact, including public meetings, public workshops, and board meetings, this is the 7th time this commission will have discussed this matter. At this particular point, there have been draft maps out there. Those draft maps have been published for at least a week prior to this meeting, and include now a map that was published for the first time a week ago, which is draft map E, included in the board package. With that, I will turn it over to Paul Mitchell of Redistricting Partners, our consultant on this, to run through a presentation and present the map.
Thank you, Paul.
All right. Thank you for having me here again. Always nice coming down here. It's lovely here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the basic presentation, but I have focused more on the draft maps. And after that, we can have any kind of conversation that you want about the benefits of individual plans or questions about the next steps that are going to have to be taken. So,
Come on in.
I thought I got that.
We just started the presentation.
May I for the emails?
Yeah.
This is really confusing. What is
This is these are all the comments that we received from our website about
this? Is this up to date?
Yes.
Alrighty, there we go.
Through yesterday.
So first off, we're here to do districting. What's interesting is if anybody calls it redistricting, nobody's going to complain. It's most commonly termed redistricting because that's what people think about when they're drawing boundaries, but technically we're doing it districting because this is the first one. These districts, like we've talked about before, have to do with when and where the elections are going to be held, what voters are going to be voting for which members of the board. And what's important for the purposes of the California Voting Rights Act is that each district will have one representative, and the only people voting for that representative will be the people from that district. That sounds like I'm really oversimplifying, having to talk a little bit too much about that one simple fact, but it is true that in certain other agencies you'll see modifications of that pattern. When we draw districts, our goal is to draw them using the existing redistricting principles that are used in redrawing districts around the country. And these are a combination of rules and processes that are either driven by statute or by case law. And more commonly, the case law and a lot of statute that's been put in place basically has been put in place to reflect case law. And the idea is to have certain processes by which we reduce the likelihood that districts could be drawn in a way that would be seen as being kind of a negative districting process. The first criteria is we're going to draw districts that are relatively equal size. And what I mean by that is it's going to be equal size of people, the number of residents, the number of people, and it's based on the 2010 census, the most recent decennial census. And when I say relatively equal, we'll get into it in some more detail, but I'm saying that we're going to have them be maybe a few percentage points above or a few percentage points below each other, but there's a good rule that the largest district and the smallest district won't be more than 5% apart from each other in terms of total population. We're going to have districts be contiguous, meaning whole parts. We're not going to have districts start in one place and kind of pop up somewhere else. They're going to be complete single units. We're going to work to maintain communities of interest. And when we talk about these communities of interest, this communities of interest, blanket gets thrown over a few different concepts. The main one that we're going to be talking about is kind of the reason why we're here, the things covered in the California Voting Rights Act, and that is the rights of protected minority groups under the federal and state voting rights acts. And in California, most of the country, we're talking about Latinos, Asians, African Americans. We can also be talking about other language minorities or religious minorities or other groups. If we had community testimony, let's say, about a large Chaldean population or a large Armenian population or a large Basque population, those might not perfectly fit within one of these three traditional ethnic minority groups, but they could be treated with the same care as these. And when we look at these groups, the two that really do present the greatest numbers in the district would be Latinos and Asians. In addition to talking about ethnic, language, and religious minorities, we also talk about communities of interest in regards to something that's a little bit of a softer concept, and that is how the community views itself. And when you're doing redistricting for something like this, it is a special agency, we are especially looking at how the community views itself vis-a-vis its interaction with the agency. I've talked about this example a few times, but if we were doing an irrigation district, we might be wondering what kind of water usage is happening around the country. If we're doing a school district, we might be wondering about where students are living or where people are living that don't have children or where people are living have high educational attainment or low educational attainment. And so different criteria can come into play as we're thinking about communities of interest. We have seen in the public testimony community of interest conversations around the Latino population, the Asian population, and kind of more abstractly, the population that uses the harbors. And we talked about two different harbors, one on either side of the district, east and west. Following local city county governmental lines, this is a way for us to draw lines, essentially piggybacking upon existing governmental structures, because as we know, very often people identify with the city that they're from. They identify with even if it's an unincorporated city, with the town that they're from. And the being in Redwood City or being a resident of Daly City is in and of itself an identification. And so it might be an identification that for some people is as strong as, I dare say, like a religious identification. What high school they went to, what city they're from, and what religion they are. Those are the ways that they identify themselves. And so in terms of a community of interest, they might have a shared interest because they're in a city. And so utilizing those boundaries wherever possible as kind of the building blocks can be a smart process for drawing lines. In fact, in the state redistricting process, there's statute around this when we're drawing legislative and congressional districts, in that they're supposed to not split cities. So there is, even if we were to look at other processes used by the state, you would see a lot of reinforcement of this concept of trying to keep cities as one of the building blocks. Finally, keeping districts compact. And compact doesn't mean smallest square mileage. Compact means more circular, more square, less squiggly lines, and there's a whole bunch of different mathematical equations that can be used to compare compactness of different plans. But essentially what you want to see, it's oftentimes just an eyeball test. This district does not look like a serpentine. This district is not a bunch of bouncing in and out, crazy lines for no reason. If you look at the plan, you will see some areas where a district line swoops in and out and in and out and pops around. But if that's because that's the exterior boundary of an existing city, maybe that's the justification why. So there is a balance to this and all of these criteria. The Voting Rights Act essentially looks at two things. It looks at at-large election systems and it looks at those that have racially polarized voting. And that's essentially why we're here, is because of a CVRA complaint. When we first started this conversation, we first started talking about the cities. And when we look at what the census provides us in terms of the data and the GIS files we get from the US government, we see a number of cities and towns. You can see the cities are up here and the towns start here, where Hillsborough, Atherton, Woodside, Portola Valley. And then we have unincorporated areas. And an unincorporated area can have just as much a legitimate claim to being a community of interest and just as much kind of self-identification for people who live in La Honda as people who live in Redwood City. But these are examples of communities that might not have a police force or a fire department or something like that. This is essentially the city map. And you can see, when I was talking about squiggly lines, you can see that in some instances, these city lines themselves are a little bit odd shaped. So you might see those being used as building blocks and have a reason to understand why some of these lines might be a little bit squiggly. But you also see the concentration of these cities on one side of the district, primarily in this corridor, the 180 and the 280 and the 101. When we look at the ethnic populations, we're looking not just at how many Latinos are in an area, or how many Asians are in an area. What's really important for us to look at is what is the potential voting power of Latinos or Asians in an area, and that's based on how the Supreme Court has ruled how you identify ethnicity. And so for the purposes of redistricting, we use a federal database from the American Community Survey that's done by the U.S. Census Department, and that gives us a calculation for the citizen voting age population. And that citizen voting age population allows you to look at Asians, Latinos, African Americans. It also has a ton of other data on, drive time and how many beds somebody has in a house and things like that. But it's the long form of the U.S. Census. So we're going to be talking about, when I say this district is 32% Asian, I mean it's 32% Asian based on the citizen voting age population from the U.S. Census. Based on these numbers, we see a district that's 25% Asian and 17% Latino. That's countywide. However, these concentrations are not evenly distributed throughout the county. There's a small African American population, but it's not geographically dense enough for it to really kind of reach that level of being a significant community of interest. We can, if there's data that we find, like North Fair Oaks has a relatively large African American population based on the rest of the community, we could take that into consideration. But really, in terms of the in terms of the ethnic populations, we're going to mostly be focusing on the Asian population and secondarily the Latino population. The Asian population is significant and concentrated in certain parts of the district. The three parts of the district that it's most concentrated on, you have this in the southeastern portion, this kind of in the middle, and then this up here in the northern portion of the city, of the county. From a redistricting perspective, we find this Asian population to be the most readily drawn into a district that would maximize the voting power of that ethnic minority. This Asian population is the densest, however, it's also relatively small in raw values. So where you might have, pockets here of 10 and 15 and 20,000, here you've got a pocket of 6,000. When you put this into a district that's going to be the size that's necessary for our plans, this Asian population gets a little bit diluted. And this district actually becomes more heavily Latino than Asian. And that's in all the plans that have been drawn by us, the county supervisors, everybody else. The Latino population, again, we see the same area here, and we see some additional Latino population going up the 101. There is a couple areas of very dense Latino population, but very, very, very small numbers. And so from a redistricting perspective, it's not going to be as impactful to the lines we draw. Population density is another key criteria that we see, and it really does drive how these plans look visually. If you didn't know what San Mateo was, and the first time you'd ever looked at a map, you might think the population is basically even everywhere. But that's far from being true. The vast majority of the population is in this 101-280 corridor. And you could basically take the remainder, this other more loosely, sparsely populated population, and combined it wouldn't make a third of a district. It's something that we have to think about in the redistricting. Essentially, how do we deal with these communities in a way that reflects who they are and what other cities they might have most relationship with, and how to treat them the best in redistricting, whether we put them all in one district or we allow them to be paired up with other communities that have denser population. The initial steps that we've taken have been to have meetings here with the board, have community meetings out in the county, and actually going out to places that are, kind of spread out throughout the area. And the idea is to maximize the opportunity for the public to engage. Our first set of hearings, we did not draw plans. I did not look at any maps for the county supervisors. I did not look at any map options for the county, for this board. I tried to essentially keep the county, in my mind, as a blank slate and listen for community of interest testimony and conversations. And like I said earlier, we did have some community input, and then I think a more significant community input from the board and even from the public at the most recent meeting we just had. After we had the community of interest opportunity, we did start drawing plans, and we drew 3 plans initially. We drew 3 plans. We named those A, B, and C. The plaintiffs in the CVRA lawsuit drew another plan. I took that data and used it to draw Plan D, and then we took the county supervisor's plan and made that available to the board for them to see how the county supervisor districts work, since they're also countywide, obviously. And then after the last meeting, we created what we labeled Plan E, which is a version of a plan that utilizes several different concepts that were kind of either taken from earlier versions of plans or taken from conversations that we had through the community meetings. This is essentially what we have right now with A, B, C, and E. Plan A, if you were to say, kind of Plan A, if you were to, somebody earlier asked me which plan looks most like the county supervisor's plan. And this plan probably looks the most like the county supervisor's plan. This plan creates a majority-minority Asian district to the north. And as you can see in these data tables, which we've become familiar with, this district has an Asian CVAP for this district number 1 of 53%. It also takes the Latino population and does a really fair draw of the Latino population, particularly this high density in North Fair Oaks. And there is that population, the Asian population in this district are paired together. How do we deal with the rural population in this district? We essentially take the entire rural population of the district, we put it into 1 seat, and then we come in here in the middle here in this Hillsborough area in order to gain enough population to make this district meet the population requirements. Plan B goes a little bit further into addressing how we can draw district number 1, and it essentially changes a little bit of how we draw 1 and 2. A downside of it is that it does take the Asian population underneath that 50% mark. It maintains District 5 the very same way, but now how have we drawn this rural population? We've essentially taken the rural population and we've split into 2 different districts, and we've paired them going east-west. So essentially you could say 1 and 2 from the original plan are a little bit shifted, 3 and 4 incorporate this concept of going east-west, and 5 maintains almost exactly the same, and potentially I think exactly the same, I forget exactly. Plan C maintains these 3 districts essentially with the same conceptual basis. However, it does some significant changing of districts 1 and 2, and it introduces a new concept. And the new concept introduced in this plan is, can we take the port that the harbor owns, that this district owns, can we take this harbor, and can we allow for 2 board members to come from areas adjacent to the harbor? And this was something that was discussed from a community meeting and incorporated in this plan. This plan does not achieve the high percentage of Asian population. It does create 2 districts with significantly high Asian population. These could be considered Asian influence districts, and that's a trade-off. Trading off 1 extremely high Asian population district that would be majority-minority for 2 Asian population districts that would be influenced. At the same time, it does introduce that concept that was coming from the community testimony about having 2 different trustees be able to represent and live near the port area. or the harbor. After the hearings, particularly discussing this concept, there were two additional concepts that were brought up in the community meetings. And the first one that came up was, can we make all of these districts essentially horizontal bands? Which would require, can we take 5 and extend it through here, through this more sparsely populated rural area? Can we leave 4 to look somewhat similar to this and 3 to look somewhat similar to this? And then take 1 and 2 and make them banded. And so that allowed us to create, I'm gonna go straight to it while we're in the groove here, it allowed us to create this Plan E. Horizontal bands, essentially District 5, which used to be more compact in terms of small square footage, it allows or square miles, it allows that district to come all the way out here to the coast. 4 bands, 3 comes across, 1 and 2 now are on top of each other, and 1 in this plan actually looks the most similar to what 1 looked like in Plan A. And in doing so, it's able to achieve, again, this 53% Asian population. So a majority-minority district is reintroduced within this concept in Plan E. And then the other thing that was discussed in that meeting, in the most recent meeting, was if we're going to do a plan horizontal bands, can we make the port on this side, I forget the name of it,
Oyster Point.
Okay. Can we allow that to be represented by, in the same way we're allowing 2 representatives down here, can we draw this in a way that there be 2 representatives here? It's right up here.
That's right.
And I'll tell you what I came to with this. This is the best job that I could do to allow 2 representatives to live near this this port. The fact is that the census block, we're not going to be dividing census blocks here. Census blocks are the finest grain of geography that we can use. And the census block is the entire port. So, unlike, we had this very interesting situation where we were drawing this one, where you can come at it from one side, it's a census block, and the other side is a census block. So essentially, the bay there is 2 census blocks meeting. In this one up here, it's not that at all. It's 1 census block is the entirety. This whole area is 1 census block. And so it either goes entirely into 1 or it goes entirely into 2. However, we can, by putting it entirely into one or the other, we still can have a representative that comes from the general very close vicinity. And you could theoretically have 2 board members who are both relatively close to the property, as opposed to, some of the other versions of plans like this, where there's only 1 that would be close to that facility. So the question raised in the last board meeting is, can we draw it so that we can have a similar kind of feature on both sides? And the answer is yes, with the caveat that since this is all 1 census block, we can't make it as, to look as evenly split. There's literally, single digits number of people living in that.
Is that the boundary between Brisbane and South San Francisco?
So if you look, I can zoom in on a map that shows the cities, but essentially you can see Brisbane up here and South San Francisco, exactly like you say, so this is South San Francisco right here.
Right.
But I don't know, I've never been to that specific spot, but it must be just very open industrial or something.
It's mostly like Genentech and biotech companies.
Yeah,
So not a lot of residents, but a lot of workers.
yeah. And so
On,
that's,
on that side.
No, it
On-
isn't changing.
Yeah, it is changing.
Yeah, that statement is not correct.
so in the current census data, it is 1 census block, so we're not gonna split it. So it's a either or, it either goes into 1 or it goes into 2.
So that may change next time the census is done. We may see those numbers shift.
Yeah, I don't know what'll happen, but the US Census in the 2011 Tiger File is what it's called. The Tiger File is the geography that underlies the census. And they almost doubled the number of census blocks in the last round. I don't know what they're gonna be doing this round. It has to do with, they approach each of the states and each of the counties to try to get underlying geographies and input on questions like this. And so particularly if the county said we're having a lot of population growth and we're having a changing, we've split a bunch of parcels here, we made some parcels residential and some parcels business or something like that, that's the kind of thing that would get the census to split an existing census block and create more. I don't know with the state of the census and what's happening the last couple of years, whether or not that's actually going to come to fruition. So that is Plan E. We of course talked about the existing county supervisor seats, and right now we're at the final stage. We have these plans that are before you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have about them. If there are questions that I can't answer off the top of my head or from some of the conversations that we've had, I can go into my computer and I can answer very specific questions. If people give me a little bit of time to address those. That's it.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
I'll open it up to public comment. I have a public comment card from TJ. If you'd like to make a comment now, that'd be great. Thanks.
Sure, is this on? Yes, okay. Thank you. TJ Glothier in West Beach, and I support what you're doing. I think that this is an important topic, and the analysis that's been done and presented has been very helpful and very positive. At the last meeting, I came away feeling that the alternative C was the one that seemed the most appealing, in that it had two districts that touched on the Pillar Point Harbor and give the opportunity to have more representation there of people who actually represent districts with harbors. After the meeting, I took some time, looked at the maps and the data, and suggested that we might go one more step, and that's what alternative E represents, which actually has 4 of the 5 districts that all have a stake in harbors. Brisbane technically is slightly above the harbor if you look at the maps, but it has a very strong interest in what's going on there at Oyster Point. And so I think you end up with 4 of the 5 districts with a direct interest in the harbor. Whether the representatives come from that area or another part of the district is a different question. But the districts have that. Another aspect of that map is that each of the districts, as Paul mentioned, touches on both the bay and the ocean. And so they all have an interest in water safety, water management, other issues that in the future may be relevant topics for the Harbor Commission as well. So I support that. I think that it does have the advantage also of having one majority-minority district, District 1 with 53% Asian. And the second district, if you combine all the minorities, is 49% minority. So that's as close as you can get, I think, to trying to have another district that's got a strong representation. So I applaud what you're doing, support it, and encourage you, and maybe consider either alternative C or E, in our view, as the one of the best.
Thanks, TJ. Any other public comment? Okay. I'll close public comment and open it up for commissioner discussions. Robert?
Sure. When I think back at this process, I think of the impetus and what sort of caused this, and what's causing this on a county-wide level in terms of representation. And I understand that, and I know that that is of great interest in our county because there are underrepresented groups, and using that as my lens and as my filter, approaching all of these maps, the 2 that really struck me were A and E. But then when I kind of further whittled it down a little bit more, the one that most closely accomplishes, I think, the intent of what we're trying to do in terms of amping up, underrepresented groups, in terms of voting power, it's E, actually. And I also like the way that the map is divided up because, as TJ said, you get co-side and bay-side. You can't ignore one. You have to represent both bay and co-side equally. And if you look at the numbers, again, going back to the original intent in terms of underrepresented groups, the Asian representation would be the CVAP would be 53%, which is the highest, tied with map A. The CVAP for the Latino population is 20%, which is the highest, I think, if you look at all the maps. And then with the African American community, 4%, which is the highest CVAP among all the other maps. So if we're going by intent, I am leaning towards E. So that's where I'm at.
Tom?
I like TJ's comments about having foothold in the bay and the ocean. I concur with the analysis that Robert gave, so I'm not going to say the same thing. So I'm in favor of Plan E.
Ed?
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you, TJ. It's really great to have a community member give us a lot of input and a lot of thought into this. It's, this is the Harvard district, and sometimes as much as we try to get the public involved, we sometimes don't hear a lot of voices, and it's great to hear a strong analysis, and it's given us some good ideas. And I'm also in agreement with Tom and with Robert that Plan E would do the best we can. We have a huge county. It's impossible to do everything you want with respect to redistricting, and I think this is a good compromise. Thank you.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Yeah, I was just noticing that it looked like a lot of people chimed in support of E, and I certainly heard TJ's comment as well as the rest of the board. And to me, it makes sense to do a map like this, especially because we're a harbor district and we want to have waterfront access available to everyone on a countywide basis, and I think this gives everyone a stake in both the San Francisco Bay and the Pacific Ocean, and I think that's a benefit to our county. I think that's one of the things that makes our county so special, is that we're almost surrounded by water, and it's unique, and it's one of the reasons that we have a harbor district. So I think E looks like a good choice.
I mean, y'all have all said the things that I've been thinking of, and I just want to thank TJ for his input on this. So I'm
Yeah.
totally with E as well. So, is there a motion to approve Plan E?
So move to approve Plan E.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well,
Where's
Debbie's
Where's Debbie?
absent.
I know.
She's off.
Commissioner Bernardo,
Aye.
Commissioner Matoush,
Aye.
Commissioner Chancarelli,
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz,
Aye.
Commissioner Sabrina, Commissioner Brennan.
Hi.
Okay, the motion carries. So that will be the adopted map for, that's one thing. And then it looks like there's another part that, so we've got the boundaries, and it says possible actions on election sequence. Steve McGraw, do you want to talk about what that means a little bit?
In this 2018 election, 2 seats are open. Consequently, in 2020, the first election cycle where these maps will be implemented, there will be 3 seats, and then in 2022 there will be 2 seats. And so, for now, then this commission should select which 3 of these districts will be up for election in 2020. I can go just, no, I think that's it. Well, the map,
If we're going with Plan E.
yeah, I'm sorry, I'm gonna turn,
Oh,
I'm gonna
Kim,
turn it over to
okay,
Kim. Thank you.
okay.
No, it was in your staff report, I was just gonna remind you.
Yeah.
So in choosing which 3, or which 2, or whatever schedule, you're supposed to do so with the intend to honor the intent of the California Voting Rights Act,
Right.
which presume, and you can decide what that means, or you can ask me to opine on that, but, so I'll leave it there.
Can you explain that?
Sure, I mean, what I think it means is, the whole point of the Voting Rights Act is to stop diluting minority votes. So it's for you to decide whether, what districts going in 2020 would maximize the ability of minority populations to effectively exercise their electoral franchise. Meaning that if you have high percentage minority districts, you might want to put them up first.
Which are the three, because
Yeah.
3 is what we have to
Right,
pick for 2020, right?
right.
Which are the 3 districts with the highest minority
Right.
population?
But I do want to, there's a caveat to what I just said, so I wasn't quite finished. There's information available that some communities vote more prevalently in gubernatorial elections, and others vote more prevalently in presidential elections. My conventional wisdom has always been that the highest turnout would be the presidential. Paul Mitchell, our demographer, and I were discussing this before the meeting, and there's a slight nuance to that, which I want to make sure the board's aware of.
Yeah, what Kim's mentioning is true, that when you're trying to draw majority-minority districts, there's a second term that can be used in Voting Rights Act law, and essentially it has to do with the effective majority-minority, the effective ability for that underrepresented minority group to be able to influence the outcome of the election. Let's say, as an example, we were drawing districts in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, the Latino population might be 60% turnout in a presidential cycle and 14% turnout in a gubernatorial cycle. And that is actually the range at which you can see some of the lower income Latino populations voting very radically high turnout in presidential and low turnout in gubernatorial. So if we were drawing a district for Latinos in Los Angeles, this would be a very, very significant issue. And it could be, so if we're talking about that North Fair Oaks area, we've done some research before, I've done some research at Redistricting Partners on that community in and of itself, and identified that that is an area where in gubernatorial election cycles, they're extremely low turnout, in presidential cycles, they're extremely high turnout. And it might be 10, 20, 30-point difference between election cycles. If we were to look at the most Asian population district here, the initial look that I've seen is that it does have some impact. The Asian population is slightly lower turnout in a 2016 election cycle, meaning not everybody's lower turnout in a gubernatorial cycle, but it is less, Asians actually suffer from being in a gubernatorial cycle. The difference might be a few percentage points. It's not as extreme as we might see in other communities where that difference is really huge. So Kim's point is that if this is a 53% Asian district, in actual voting power in the 2016 general, these communities were only high 40%, almost 50% of the actual votes cast. They might have been 53% of the eligible voters, but they were a lower percentage of the actual votes cast. And in the 2014 general election, I took a look as we were here, they were 36% of the votes cast. So essentially, as you can see, as you get to gubernatorial cycle or lower turnout elections, you can see the weakening of that, what we've created as a majority-minority district. So in the political calculation, you have a number of different things to think about as to how we number these districts. But what Kim is essentially arguing is that if the interest is in maximizing the Asian voting population here, or maximizing the Latino voting population here, that to do either of those, we really would want to put a little bit of weight on the side of putting these districts into a presidential cycle.
And that would be my advice.
Okay.
But it's a balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No one can argue if you do that.
So we've talked about
Right.
2, but we need to come up with 3, right? What's the
Well-
third one that's the most minority represented,
The
potentially?
third one that's the most minority representative would be this district number 2. District number 1 we've already talked about as being the most Asian district. District number 5 we can talk about as being the most Latino. And then district number 2 is the most coalition district. And as we talk about the different terminology, we talk about majority minority as being kind of the federal gold standard for under the Voting Rights Act. Then you can talk about coalition being the ability of two groups combined to form a majority minority. And in a way, this Asian population, Latino population almost reaches a majority minority in themselves. If you add the African American, you're almost to exactly 50%. So if you were to talk about 3 districts that were the most ethnic, you'd be talking about those 2, and the districts that are the lowest ethnicity would be 3 and 4.
Discussion? I think we're soaking in all the information.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm getting it, but I think it would be helpful to maybe, I know you explained it really well, so I do get it, but I think for people maybe watching the video, this is a lot to take in. So could you maybe explain it one more time?
Sure. Absolutely. No, this is,
It's so important.
It may be slightly different.
yeah. I'll do it from this side.
Right and left.
So, the reason we're here is because of a claim of a Civil Rights Act violation. There's a claim that the existing structure of our elections inhibit the ability of ethnic minority groups to have an equal vote in electing the candidates of their choice. And insofar as this is a remedy, the drawing of lines is seeking to remedy that and to give these ethnic populations the best chance they have of electing a candidate of their choice. So, we've already chosen a structure. We've chosen the underlying geography of our plan. The architecture is here. Now, how do we use this architecture to actually implement the elections? We have to have 3 elections come up in the presidential year and 2 elections come up in a gubernatorial year. And it's starting in the 2020 presidential year, then the 2022 gubernatorial year. If that's the case, while you're weighing all of the things that you're going to be considering about the order of these elections, you're primarily going to be looking at which incumbents are coming up in which seats when, and you're going to be balancing that also with this principle that got us here in the first place. How do we maximize the voting strength of these populations? And the way to ensure that, say, District 1 is an example, I think this is the strongest example, the way to ensure that District 1, that the community there has the greatest ability to elect a candidate of choice is to put the election for District 1 in a year where those populations are the highest turnout relative to all voters. And so, if we were to look at District 5 as well, insofar as we want to be sensitive to the Latino population, we want to maximize their ability to influence candidates of choice. For Latinos, putting District 5 in the presidential election would help bolster their chances of electing a candidate of choice. And when the question came up, what's the 3rd district with the greatest ethnic population? The 3rd district with the greatest ethnic population would be District number 2. And this district is what we would call a coalition district. It is not a predominantly Asian district, it's not a predominantly Latino district, but it also is not a predominantly white district. And District 3 and 4 would be the ones that have the most white population, the lowest ethnicity, and in a way, District 3 and 4 are being drawn to elect 1 representative for each seat, but we're not here because of the complaints of the communities in District 3 and 4. We're here because of the complaints of communities like those in District 1 and 5 primarily.
Yeah. I do have a public comment card. Mary, if you'd like to make your public comment now, or if you want to wait until we have some discussion.
Well, you know, thank you. I wasn't sure if this was the appropriate time, but I'm just curious about, we're only looking at Caucasian, Asian, Latino, and Black?
Yeah.
Because it's my understanding that, and Bernardo, you're Filipino, but it's like Filipinos are more considered Pacific Islanders. and not Asian, so would that not warrant their own category?
So, yeah, this was discussed, if the board wants me to answer.
Yeah, please, because I
Um,
think Asian, as an Asian, is very broadly
Yeah.
defined. Even in District 5, there's a high concentration of Asians
Yeah.
under that definition, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so there was a discussion.
And not me Asian.
Yeah, there was a discussion in the earlier, in one of the earlier presentations, that the Asian population in this district, particularly when I did the earlier slides, where I showed, was it East Palo Alto that has
Yeah,
the extremely
yeah.
high Asian population?
Very high.
But that Asian population is primarily Filipino.
No, it's
no,
Tongan, Fijian,
Hawaiian,
Asian
Hawaiian,
Pacific, yeah.
Hawaiian, there's a
Asian
huge
Pacific
Hawaiian
Islander.
number.
Right.
So yeah, that is what we found in the data, was that that was what was influencing that high concentration of Asian population.
Right.
However, that high concentration of Asian population, in terms of raw numbers, is relatively small when we start drawing districts that have 150,000 people in them. So there might be, as an example, 6,000 that would be considered Pacific Islanders, and they contribute to this Asian population only a, 3 or 4 percentage points.
But if Filipinos are considered Pacific Islanders, does that change anything in any of these districts?
They're getting lumped in with the Asian
Asians.
category.
Yeah, including me, Chinese. We're all lumped in as Asians.
So
For better or for worse.
are Filipinos okay with that?
Well, I mean,
So-
are any Asian,
There's, okay,
Asian-
I don't think we have a choice.
yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
So what's interesting about this is actually a very interesting conversation
Yeah.
too, because
that, I was just wondering.
what's interesting is on the other side of the bay, in Ohlone College, I did a redistricting and a CVRA analysis for Ohlone. And in Ohlone College, the Asian population all voted against each other. Because it was the Japanese and the Filipino and the, and they were, and when we looked at election results for the Chinese-born member of the community college board, we found that the bulk of the Asian population actually voted against him. And so we deal in this interesting situation where, and I was talking to the editor of La Opinion.
Yeah,
The editor of La Opinion said she was never Latina until she came to California, because she was from El Salvador. And she didn't consider herself a Latina until she came to California and found that there was this cohesive kind of identity around being Latino that's reinforced by similar surnames and similar cultures and a similar kind of experience. But within the Asian community, that there's a lot of bifurcation. In the Asian community, you can have Koreans, you can have Vietnamese, and you can have Chinese and Japanese. Based on different surnames, they all can all tell each other's ethnicity, and there's dividing lines in the Asian community that are more significant than in the Latino community.
Mhm.
However, like it or not, the US Census, and with the citizen voting age population, and with a lot of the data that we're getting, it essentially is putting a blanket over the larger Asian population as a whole. And so we aren't, I could, as an example, split out by surname the ethnicity of voter populations throughout the whole area, but that wouldn't be a legal basis upon which to calculate the Asian population.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Lorenas, but I'm Caucasian,
Yeah.
so.
well, I mean, Robert Bernardo and I are both Asian, and we have completely different surnames, right? Chang and Bernardo.
Not even, yeah, close.
I'll open it up to commissioner discussion. Robert?
Well, gosh, there's just so much to absorb here in terms of, I kind of always go back to like, what is the original intent of this whole lawsuit situation, and what brought this about, and how do we cure it, how do we remedy it? That's kind of where I'm at, and I need to think about it a little bit more, especially looking at the CVAPs and everything. Does anyone want to go? I'm still thinking about this.
Well, so I'm gonna try to throw something else out there. We have our regular meeting scheduled on September 19th. We've already chosen the map, which I think is a huge decision. And we can kind of go away and think about the others unless y'all want to do this now. It doesn't matter to me. So I just want to throw that out there so we can continue the discussion and go, Tom, if you have anything to say, and Sabrina.
On listening to our presenter, it sounds like 4 and 5 for 20 make a good combination, just whether we do 2, 4, 5, and then in the gubernatorial years, 1 and 3. So it's in the gubernatorial year, do you do 1, 2, 3, or do you do 2, 4, 5 presidential, and then 1, 3 in gubernatorial 2022?
That doesn't match up with what I thought you said.
It's 1 and 2. 1, 2, and 5.
Let me be clear, it's entirely your guys' decision.
Okay.
And it can be utilizing other criteria other than the ones that are being brought up by Kim. Kim is bringing up this issue about maximizing the voting power of ethnic minorities as kind of a principle as to why we're here. And if we were to do that, the question was asked, what districts are we actually talking about? And Kim's first discussion point, like top of the page, was District 1, period.
Right.
Majority minority district.
Got it.
Right.
If somebody said, well, what are other ethnic districts, District 5 would kind of
Right.
come in second place. It's the district with the greatest Latino population. And then District 3, or District 2 would come in kind of third place
So
as a coalition
one,
district.
one would be the
One and
Number
five.
One is the one that Kim is bringing up as a concern.
number 5 would be the second, and then number 2 would be the third. And the recommendation was to maximize getting the most minority votes. We would do that during a presidential, not a gubernatorial.
Well, no, that depends on
It-
the
That's what
district.
they said.
It's just,
No,
Commissioner
that-
Tranquilli, I think if you wouldn't mind, I think
Yeah,
Kim has something.
because
he'd like to say.
I heard two different things from y'all,
Um,
like
And
presidential
that's
and,
because there are probably 1,000 possibilities.
Right.
And so, from the legal perspective, District 1 should be in 2020. I mean, I would really advise you to do that. After that, it's more of a balancing. And, you know, and Paul and I can discuss it and for hours and come up with an agree or not agree. But I look at District 2 as a pretty leading contender for this in second place. And you could argue it's 5. Because if you look at the combined minority population in District 2, it's quite powerful. And maybe that's a way. So it's for you to decide how to honor the intent of the California Voting Rights Act. I think there's less discretion with regard to District 1.
Can I say
If
something?
we.
yeah, let me, okay,
Okay.
Tom, are you done with your, if you're, okay, Ed.
So I agree with Virginia. I think we've done a good job getting to this point. I don't see the reason to hurry this. It gives an opportunity to maybe get some input from the public. Now that we can actually say, here's this is what we chose. I'm not sure there's a lot of time to do that, given when our next meeting is, but
Well,
there's at
we
least
could
some
always
opportunity to get some.
Schedule a special one
Yeah.
just specifically for this too.
And I for one, would like to think about this and talk to some folks. I mean, one thing we as commissioners bring to this community is our own community, and people that talk to us about what we're doing. So I appreciate an opportunity to talk to folks and get some input.
Sabrina?
So if, I mean, I'm okay with voting now, but if people want to wait, that's okay with me too. If we are going to wait specifically to get more input, then I think we need to continue to get input on our website, since that's been what we've been doing so far, and I think that's what people now are expecting. So I think it would be good to keep that open and maybe clarify that we're not taking input on maps anymore, because we've already made a decision, so people understand what they're being asked to get input on, that it's us figuring out which districts are in a gubernatorial or presidential election, and then there needs to be some information for them to make their choice on, like we need to provide something, I don't know what it is, to give them information that would help them come to a decision that would help us avoid any sort of legal challenge. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you, and certainly we can work on the website to do a sort of polling like we did on the maps and break it out by 2020 and 2022. I would remind the commission, however, that we've got a drop dead
Yeah, I was gonna ask you.
September 25,
25 or 28?
20
20, okay.
25th, for making this final determination in order to be free and clear, if you will, which means either resolving this at the September 19th regular meeting, or if not then a special meeting some point prior to September 25th.
Robert, you had a
Yeah,
question?
I have a question. It's just more procedural. So, is okay, we're looking at 2020 and 2022. Is there a specific number in 2020 and 2022? Is it like it's 2 or 3, or I'm confused? Sorry, please clarify.
You maintain your current schedule.
So it's how many in 2020? 3. So it's 3 and then
Right.
2 in 2020. Okay, I'm sorry, just so lost. Okay, thank you.
But that can change, is what I'm hearing.
No.
No, he just says maintain.
There will be 3
Right.
commissioners whose terms expire in 2020. And therefore, there are 3 seats open, so you must pick 3 districts for 2020
Okay.
and 2 in 2022, and then 3 in 2024 and 2. So that's set not by your decision now, but that's set by the statutes
Right.
in
And the election.
Harbors and Navigation Code, your enabling
Yeah.
legislation.
Okay, I have a public comment, TJ, if you'd like
You're
to.
going to have another one.
Okay, oh, okay.
Thank you. TJ Glathier in West Beach. I do think that this last point introduces another constraint. If you need to have 3 seats, and you want to also maximize the minority participation, I think we've already heard that District 1 would be one that you'd want to put on that map. If District 5 is the second one, which has the Latino population on that,
Yeah,
there are 2 of the seats then that would be up. You need to pick a district that has 1. There's only one more choice. I think it has to be District 4.
yeah, I
Because
agree.
Otherwise, you
Yeah.
have 3. So I think
Yeah.
I'd encourage you to make the decision tonight, put this to bed. It's been talked about a lot. You've got a lot of input. You'll have another opportunity to do all this in a couple more years. And I think that people need the opportunity to kind of go ahead and start planning, implement it, and you've got a lot of other issues on your plate that you can turn to after this is done.
Thank you. Oh, okay, another public comment? Seppi Richardson? Thank you.
Hello, Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me to make my point. Excellent job tonight presenting and summarizing. This was a difficult task, and all of you, my congratulations to all of you to agree with this plan that has been set before you. I tend to disagree that we need to put more information on the website because this and that. General public really they're not trained to understand it legally. They understand common sense. What is the common sense? Common sense is they vote during the presidential, there's high vote turnout, and that's what they understand. They don't understand about the legal this, legal that. So let's not extend the timeline because legally is, people don't understand and so forth. I think that you guys know what needs to be done, and I think you can vote for it tonight.
Okay,
I really do think so. Thank you.
thank you. Tom?
A motion, 2020-145, 2022, 2 and 3.
Second.
I'd like
Okay, just to make sure that I got that just right, so 1, 4, and 5 in 2020 and 2 and 3 in 2022, is that the motion?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for just.
Can I make a comment?
Sure, well, yeah, let's open it up for this. There
Yeah,
is a
we-
motion and a second, so let's have the discussion.
So first of all, I'd like to say thank you for your comment. I completely disagree, and I apparently have a much higher opinion of the general public than you do. I don't think this is that complicated, the intent of this law. And rushing, I don't see that making a decision today versus making a decision a few weeks from now is gonna be that big a deal with respect to the other things that we as commissioners have to do. And I believe that the public should be given the opportunity, since we don't have to hurry, we can comply with the law and we can get these things done equitably with input from the public. So I would like to give them a chance and not prejudge their intellect.
Sabrina?
Thank you. I am really appalled that we would consider anything other than putting the districts with the most minority population in the presidential election cycle, so that would be 2020. We just heard from 2 attorneys and our consultant that we hired that districts 1, 2, and 5 are the districts with the highest minority population, and they made a very convincing case for that. They also talked about the benefits of having minority population elections during a presidential election. I know from doing research that we definitely have higher turnout in this county during presidential elections. It's significant. And the whole purpose of what we're doing here is to try to even the playing field for minority populations and make sure that they have equal footing in getting their candidates elected and having representation. And so for that reason, I can't support this, and in fact, I will publicly oppose it. If anybody decides to sue the district over it, I will absolutely support them. If any attorneys are watching, that's my message. So that's where I'm at with it.
I have a comment. District 4 has that North Fair Oaks area in it, and I'm not sure, I mean, that's a pretty heavy, I mean, Redwood City in general, I think, is a majority, what is it, a minority majority city? So if you combine 4 and 5 in one, which would bring the, I guess I don't know, maybe the California Voting Rights Act spirit into play. They do have, if you combine 4 and 5, it's a pretty big minority group, especially since, if I read this right, Redwood City is the largest city in District 4. Is that right, Paul?
Daly City?
No, Redwood
Redwood
City
City.
in District 4, which I believe is it a majority minority? Is that what that's called?
I was actually looking at that when you mentioned it. I'll look at it.
I think it is.
I think it is too.
Yeah. East Palo Alto is the same way. North Fair Oaks, which is in the unincorporated area, is definitely that way. I mean, those are very heavy minority, for lack of a better word, areas in this county. And obviously District 1, which is heavily Filipino, I think, or Asian by this definition. And actually, even though East Palo Alto has a lot of, or East Palo Alto's Asian population is smaller relative to the overall, in terms of the density in that area. If you look, I mean, they talk about a minority majority city, that is it. In Redwood City too.
And you have
In
this here.
Bellhaven, there's the whole, that other side of Menlo Park. The east side of the Bellhaven area is also, I don't know what it is now, but it's heavily, has a heavy minority population with it's the Latino population and a growing Asian population as well.
May I add something?
Yeah, please, I'm just talking right now.
Well, no, you're bringing up good points, and I think this is all the more reason to not rush into this when we don't have to. We can give it some thought, look at the numbers, and ask for public input. I cannot think of any reason to rush this. This is too important. So I agree with you.
If you'd like to make another public comment, Seppi, then I'm gonna still keep the public comment open. So Seppi and TJ, if you wanna fill another card out, just for the ease of the board clerk who is absent today, that would help her a
If we,
lot.
Commissioner Chancarelli, for the convenience of the public, we've got one, so we've got correct spelling.
Exactly.
Yeah, oh, okay,
I'm-
do you wanna,
I'm
are you
making-
okay with?
I'm making the notes and I
Okay.
can.
Okay, then
ensure
don't worry
that
about
they
it,
get the right
okay.
information.
TJ, you don't have to do it, because Steve McGraw, our general manager, is keeping a good tally on who's speaking.
Thank you, TJ Galathy again. I think your goals are good and admirable. We want to be sure to get the broadest input and to really consider this carefully. But I think the problem is over-constraint. If you have to have 3 seats up in 2020. So the question is, do you need to have 3 or could you only have 2? Must be 3?
Has to be
If
three.
it must be
Yeah.
3,
Yeah.
District 1 must be included because of the minority
I
population.
think 4 and 5.
And 5.
And 5, there are 2 seats in those 2 districts. You must pick another district with 1 seat. Or you must have a way to decide who is going to step down from the board. If you do 1, 5, and 2, there are 2 seats that will be elected and you have 3 incumbents, you're going to have 3 new people coming on, you're going to have a board of 6 people. Can you do that? Could you operate for
That's-
2 years with a board of 6
So
Can
people?
you just explain?
It's
how
not the way it
works?
works.
See, this is my point, why
Yeah.
we need to take
Well,
our time.
If you have 1, 2, and 5 up for election, you're going to elect a person for each of those districts. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. You have 3 incumbents from the other districts. What happens to them?
You don't have 3 incumbents, you'll have 2 incumbents.
District 4 has 1 and District 3 has 2. People who are currently
No,
on this
no,
board.
no, District 5 has 1, and actually,
It doesn't matter where
yeah,
the
it doesn't,
incumbents
it
live.
doesn't matter,
Right,
right, that's what I'm,
People serve out their
Right.
terms.
Right.
Okay, so the terms are
Right.
already,
Yes.
yeah, we're gonna
That must
serve
be
that,
honored.
that's right,
okay. Thank you.
yeah. Seppi?
It's good to clear it up.
Yeah,
And with all due respect to Mr. Morenas, tonight is not a campaign night to turn and twist the comments. People vote when they have interest, when it meets their needs. The reason they're out there during presidential campaign, they have an interest. That's why they come in. One of the major problems we have up in Daly City, the Asian community are not participating as much in the votes that takes place. Does that mean you come and ignore them? No, you do not. This corrects it. The more you delay it, the more they're not going to continue doing what they're doing. Has nothing to do with turning and twisting and insulting community members to say they don't understand law. I did not say they don't understand law. What they understand, what it interests them. Not what you say, what somebody else does. They're very smart in what they want. We turn and confuse what they want, for sure. Thank you. I think you can make the decision tonight.
thanks. I have one other thing to say, just to the board, and Paul, help me out here, these rural areas, especially in District 5, near Pescadero, La Honda, well, probably that Pescadero, the more agriculture area. Do we have any idea what the demographics are there? I mean, you may not, because it's so sparsely populated, right? But, and even in the District 4, between, just south of Half Moon Bay, I can't even read this very well, but
So the issue is that there are some, as we'd seen earlier, there are some Latino populations
yeah,
on this, in these
in
more
this
rural
rural
areas.
area, yeah.
And there are some Asian populations in the rural areas.
Yeah.
However, the raw value of those is somewhat
Is
negligible when you're
yeah.
talking about 140,000 people.
Yeah, but if you combine that with, like if it's mostly Latino, for example, in 5 and 4, if you combine whatever little population there is that's of the same same community, or like communities, if you will. And even with Half Moon Bay and the Asian population going with one, and I'm thinking out loud now, and even with the Asians in East Palo Alto, that area, I mean, the demographics may be small in number, but if you combine them, it's still within that same racial group, is what I'm saying. Does that make any sense?
I'm not able to follow you because we've already, like, Plan E's established.
Yeah, I'm looking at Plan E.
So we're stuck with that because we voted for that. So
But-
we're looking at the numbers for Plan E, and it's all right there.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is the small negligible numbers in those sparsely populated areas are not necessarily Caucasian. They're gonna match the other side of the more populated areas, even though they're small in their respective areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's in the cumulative.
Yeah, I know, I know,
Cumulative
I know.
number for each district.
If it helps the commissioners, I've added the cumulative totals for the minorities represented in the
Yeah,
CPAC.
I know. I'm just
And,
analyzing it out loud
yes.
myself, that's all.
the total, the combined in District 1 is 77%.
Yes.
In District 2 is 49%. In District 3 is 35%. In District 4 is 29%. And in District 5 is 36%.
Mhm.
So the three highest are Districts 1, 2, and 5.
Yeah, there is a motion in a second, so, okay. Any other discussion? Any other public comment? Then I'm gonna close public comment. Okay, then roll call, please.
Just before you do the roll call, because it's been some time,
Yes.
is
Would you
the
like to
commission
repeat
clear
them?
on what they're voting on?
Tom made the motion, would you please repeat your motion?
I'm saying in 2020, pick districts 1, 4, and 5 on the draft plan map E. In 2022, pick districts 2 and 3.
That was the motion, thank you.
And Robert seconded it.
And I have a comment.
Okay, please, Sabrina.
So that makes no sense at all because we know that District 1, District 5,
Let's see the,
and District 2 have the highest minority populations. District 4 has the least minority population. So we clearly should not pick District 4 for a presidential election, which is what is included in this motion. That is not in keeping with the spirit of the California Voting Rights Act, and it could open us up to litigation, which, if any attorneys are watching, I would be happy to weigh in on. So there's no way that I could support this because this is not what we are supposed to be doing here. And this, it doesn't pass the smell test, so I'll just put it that way.
Robert?
Okay, my understanding for tonight, and then I'm gonna call for the question after my comment. My understanding for tonight is, Kim said that we absolutely have to have number 1 in 2020, okay, so we did. And then any combination of the other districts that have underrepresented groups. 5, I was just told, has underrepresented groups. So, so we have 1 and 5 already in 2020. So the question becomes, what should the other one be? I am totally fine with 1, 4, and 5 and putting 2 and 3 in 2020 because I believe
No, 2 and 3 is 2022.
Sorry. 2 and 3 in 2022 because if you combine 4 and 5, that's a huge underrepresented population. And we didn't even discuss under this umbrella of Asian with Pacific Islanders, mainland Asians. We didn't even talk about South Asians like Indian community and Pakistani and Persian. That's all in 4 and 5. I mean, so I think in 2020, you're gonna have a good representation, and it includes number one, which satisfies what Kim said, so I call the question.
Okay, roll call, please.
One second. Commissioner Bernardo,
Aye.
Commissioner Mathush,
Aye.
Commissioner Chancarelli,
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz,
Nope.
Commissioner Brennan.
No.
Okay, the motion carries 3-2. Okay, our next regular meeting is on September 19th in South City, and is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Brennan. Motion to adjourn.
I think someone else.
No, he's doing roll call.
Oh, we don't usually do roll call for that, do we?
We do, but it doesn't matter. I mean,
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz, Commissioner Chancarelli,
aye.
Commissioner Mathush,
Aye.
Commissioner Bernardo,
Aye.
meeting adjourned.
Meeting adjourned at 8:15 exactly.
That's who's on this.
Okay.